Save my tribe, and I'll give you strong offspring," said the desperate Apache woman to the cowboy.
Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The sun was still high, but already burning into the back of Luke Brannick's neck. The air had that dry weight to it that made breathing harder than it should be. Every step of the horses kicked up small puffs of pale dust that hung in the heat before drifting away. Luke led the four-man column, his hands resting loosely on the reins, the weight of a Winchester carbine balanced across his saddle. He wasn't in a hurry, but he wasn't wasting time either. Luke was 41, tall, broad in the shoulders from years of hard labor and harder riding. His hair was sun-bleached brown, his face weathered from wind and grit. He'd served nearly 6 years as a scout for the Army before walking away from orders he no longer believed in. Since then, he had made his living as a trail guide and sometime problem solver, the kind of man people came to when the law was too far or too slow. This time, the message had come from an old Army contact, a small Apache settlement in trouble, hit by raiders that weren't looking to trade. The other 3 men behind him were all from his old unit: Tom Fletcher, Cole Markham, and Harlan Tate. They were riders he trusted, men who had stood in rifle smoke with him more than once. They weren't here for pay. They were here because Luke had asked, and because the idea of raiders taking women sat wrong with all of them. They crested a low ridge, and the air changed. The breeze that had been brushing the sage-grass died, and the smell reached them, with smoke, sour and clinging. Luke pulled his horse to a stop and stood in the stirrups for a better look. Below, pressed against the base of a rock bluff, the Apache encampment lay broken. Half the lodges were collapsed, the hides blackened from fire. Smoke still rose from a few that had burned down to the frames. Scattered gear lay where it had been dropped, baskets overturned, blankets half buried in trampled dirt. No livestock in sight, no children laughing. Luke's chest tightened. The signs were clear. Whoever had done this hadn't left in a rush. They'd taken what they wanted. He swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground hard, and motioned for his men to hold. His rifle stayed on his shoulder, but his right hand rested loosely near the grip. He walked toward the camp slow, giving whoever was left a chance to see he wasn't coming in to take anything. From the shadows of the bluff, a group emerged, mostly women, a few elders, and 1 or 2 young men with bows held low. They looked wary, but not ready to run. And then one woman stepped forward. She was in her mid-20s, tall and lean, but with the muscle of someone used to riding and carrying weight. Her long black hair was tangled from wind and smoke. She wore a deerskin dress, beaded along the hem, but one shoulder strap had been torn, letting the fabric slip low enough to bare her collarbone. There was a bruise at her temple, and her bare feet were scuffed raw from rock and dirt. She stopped a few paces from Luke, her eyes fixed on him. When she spoke, her voice was low and deliberate, her English clear but accented. "Save my people," she said, "and I will give you strong offspring." Behind Luke, Tom shifted in the saddle and muttered under his breath, but Luke didn't react. Her offer wasn't a joke to her. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't begging for herself. She was bargaining for what was left of her people. Luke studied her face. He saw exhaustion there, but also defiance. She was hurt, but she was standing straight. "What happened?" he asked. She glanced toward the north ridge. 6 riders. 2 wagons. They took horses. They took women. Luke's jaw tightened. 6 riders wasn't much if you caught them right, but with wagons they'd be moving steady and leaving a clear trail. The problem was timing. The longer they waited, the further ahead those riders got. He turned to his men. "We ride at dawn," he said. Tom frowned. "If they've got a day's head start." "We ride at dawn," Luke repeated. His tone left no room for argument. For the rest of the evening, Luke moved through the camp, checking the wounded, handing out what water they had in their canteens. He knelt beside a boy with a cracked lip and tipped water into his mouth, steadying the gourd with one hand. The woman, Nayina, as he later learned, did the same for an older man with a cut on his forehead. At one point, their shoulders brushed. Neither of them pulled away. Luke didn't speak much that night, but in his mind, the decision had already settled. He wasn't here because she had offered him something. He was here because walking away from people who needed help was the kind of man he had once promised himself he'd never become. The sky was pale and empty when Luke stepped away from the fire's dying glow. He had been awake most of the night, listening to the muffled sounds of the camp, the low murmur of the elders, a baby fussing somewhere under the bluff, the faint shuffle of footsteps as people tried to rest without letting themselves fall too deep into sleep. He had spent enough years in places like this to know what followed a raid. Fear didn't vanish when the shooting stopped. It stayed in the air, heavy, waiting to see if the trouble would come back. He walked to where Nayina was squatting near the ashes, feeding a few thin sticks into the flames. She glanced up briefly, the firelight catching the bruise on her temple. She had changed nothing about her torn dress, not even tried to hide the scrape along her collarbone. "You will ride?" she asked. "Soon as there's light enough to see tracks," Luke said. He took a long drink from his canteen, then handed it to her. She drank, then passed it back without speaking. He studied her a moment longer. "How far behind are we?" She looked toward the ridge. "Half a day, maybe less." They took the north trail. "There is water after 6 miles. They will stop there." Luke nodded. That answered one question he'd been turning over since the night before. Raiders with women and wagons always slowed down at water. It meant they could catch them before they reached a canyon or cut that gave them cover. Behind them, Tom was saddling up. "You're sure it's only 6 riders?" he called. Nayina's jaw tightened. 6 men. 2 wagons. The horses are ours. They have 2 rifles, the rest pistols. Luke turned toward Tom. That's enough to handle. He didn't add the rest of what he was thinking. That pistols meant they'd try to close the distance before firing. Cole and Harlan came from the far side of the camp, leading the horses. Both men looked tired but alert, rifles already loaded. Luke went over the plan again. Ride hard until they hit the water, dismount before the crest, come in low and fast, keep the fight close to stop them from harming the captives. No one argued. As they mounted up, Luke looked back at the camp. A few children were watching from behind one of the half-burned lodges. The elders stood further back, arms folded, their expressions unreadable. Nayina was still by the fire. When he met her eyes, she gave one short nod. They rode north, following the tracks. The desert here was open, the ground hard and pale with scattered brush. The wagon wheels had left deep, clear lines in the dirt. Horse prints overlapped them, heading straight toward the low hills. By mid-morning, Luke raised his hand to slow the pace. The sound of trickling water carried on the wind. He signaled the others to dismount. They tied the horses in a shallow wash, then moved up the slope on foot, keeping low. From the ridge, Luke saw them, 6 men and 2 wagons, just as Nayina had said. The wagons were pulled up near a narrow stream, shaded by cottonwoods. 3 women were tied near the back wheel of the first wagon. 2 men were filling canteens. One was tending to a horse's leg, and another stood on watch, a rifle slung lazy over his shoulder. Luke checked his men's positions. Cole would take the man on watch, Tom the one at the stream, Harlan the one by the horse. Luke himself would go straight for the wagons. The last 2 raiders, wherever they were, would have to be handled fast. He gave the signal. The first shots cracked sharp in the morning stillness. The man with the rifle dropped where he stood. The one at the stream spun and fell back into the water. Luke was already running, rifle up, shouting for the women to get low. One raider lunged from behind the wagon with a pistol, firing wild. The bullet snapped past Luke's ear. He fired once, and the man fell, his gun skittering into the dirt. The last 2 came from the cottonwoods, shouting, firing. Cole cut one down with a clean shot to the chest. The other turned to run, but Harlan was on him before he made it 10 steps. When it was quiet, Luke went to the women. He cut their ropes and told them to keep their heads down until he was sure it was over. One of them clung to his arm for a moment, shaking. He eased her toward the stream, where Tom was already filling extra canteens. They checked the wagons, stolen goods, 2 mares, some grain. Luke found a sack of ammunition, mostly .44 rounds. He took it and split it between them. The ride back was slower. The women were weak from heat and hunger. Luke gave his canteen to the youngest and walked his horse beside her until they reached the bluff. When they rode in, Nayina was there, standing apart from the others. Her eyes went first to the women, counting them, making sure. Then they went to Luke. She didn't smile, but the tension in her face eased. "You kept your word," she said. Luke didn't answer. He only nodded, stepping down from his horse and leading it toward the shade. He was already thinking about the next step because raiders like these didn't act alone, and someone out there had sent them. The heat lingered even as the sun began to lower, making the air inside the bluff feel close and heavy. The rescued women had been given water, food, and blankets. Some sat in the shade, speaking softly in their own tongue. Others rested near the half-collapsed lodges, too tired to move. Luke walked the camp slowly, checking every face. He had seen enough raids to know survivors sometimes carried wounds no one noticed until it was too late. Naina was crouched beside one of the younger women, pressing a damp cloth to her wrist where rope burns had broken the skin. She looked up when Luke approached. "She will be fine," Naina said quietly, "but she needs rest." Luke nodded, his eyes moving over the camp. He had questions that hadn't been answered yet. The tracks of the raiders had been too clean, their approach too easy. They'd known the camp's position, the number of horses, even where the lodges stood. That kind of knowledge didn't come from guessing. "Someone told them where to find you," Luke said, his voice low. Naina's expression changed. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. She glanced toward the elders seated in a small group near the rock wall. "One man left the camp 3 weeks ago," she said. "He argued with the elders about trade. He wanted more rifles. They told him no." Her eyes hardened. "He went east." Luke filed that away. It was the first real lead. Raiders didn't always work alone. Sometimes they were the hand for someone else's coin. Tom came up from the North Trail, dust on his shirt, carrying a saddlebag. "You'll want to see this," he said, handing Luke a folded piece of paper. Luke opened it. Inside was a ledger page torn from a larger book. At the top was a name he recognized, Calder Nash, a ranch foreman with a reputation for paying men to do his dirty work. The page listed supplies, horses, and an amount in gold. It was dated just days before the raid. Luke didn't say much. He simply handed the paper to Naina so she could see. Her jaw tightened again. "He will come back," she said. "He might," Luke replied, "but not tonight." Before dark, he gathered the elders, his own men, and a few of the younger braves. He explained the likely connection between Nash and the raid. He laid out the reality. The camp was vulnerable, and they had 2 choices: move to another location or prepare to hold this one. The elders spoke quietly among themselves. Then one of them said what Luke had already suspected. The burial ground was here, the water was close, and moving meant leaving both behind. That decided it. They would stay. Luke spent the next hour walking the perimeter with the young braves, showing them how to use the terrain. He pointed out where brush could be piled to block sight lines, where a low wall of stone could be stacked to break a mounted charge. He marked shallow trenches that could trip a horse without trapping a man on foot. Later, when the light was gone and the fire burned low, Luke sat apart, cleaning his rifle. Naina came to him, carrying a bowl of stew. She set it down beside him without a word. He picked it up, ate a few spoonfuls, then said, "Tomorrow, I'll send 2 men to the trading post for supplies. The rest of us will start building defenses." She watched him a moment, then sat beside him, close enough that the torn edge of her dress brushed his arm. "Why do you stay?" she asked. Luke thought about it. He could have given her the easy answer, that it was because of the offer she had made when they first met. But that wasn't it. "Because I've seen what happens when no one does," he said finally. She didn't reply, but her hand stayed on her knee, just touching his leg, until the fire was nothing but embers and the night was quiet. The morning came with a clear, dry sky and the smell of smoke still faint in the air from the burned lodges. Luke rose before the sun crested the ridge, checking the perimeter and the condition of the guards who had been posted through the night. The young braves had stayed alert. No tracks came near the bluff during the dark hours. That was good. It meant Nash or his hired riders weren't moving yet. But Luke knew that wouldn't last. By the time the rest of the camp stirred, Luke had already laid out the next steps in his head. The elders wanted to know what could be done to keep the camp from falling to another raid. Some of the younger men asked if the army could be called for help, but Luke told them plain, The nearest post was 2 days away, and there was no guarantee the soldiers would see protecting an Apache camp as their problem. That answer was not what they wanted to hear, but it was the truth. Tom and Cole volunteered to ride to the trading post with a list of supplies: sacks of flour, salt, coffee, more ammunition, nails, rope, and canvas. Luke also told them to see if anyone had heard about Nash's movements, whether he was gathering more men or heading elsewhere. They left before mid-morning, following the trail north. While they were gone, Luke set the others to work. He had the younger braves carry rocks to build a low wall along the most exposed side of the camp. Older men dug shallow trenches where the ground sloped, just deep enough to break a horse's stride. Women gathered brush to stack in piles that could be set alight if needed. Everyone had a task. Naina worked alongside the others, carrying stones despite the bruising on her shoulder and the raw skin on her feet. Luke noticed she never complained, even when her hands reddened from the rough rock. Once, when she stopped to rest, he walked over and handed her a canteen. She took it, drank, and met his eyes for a long moment before passing it back. "This is our home," she said simply. "I will not leave it." The heat rose through the day. Sweat darkened Luke's shirt, and dust clung to his skin. Still, the work continued. He walked the lines, adjusting where the wall curved, checking that firing positions had clear sight. In between, he kept thinking about the name in the ledger, Calder Nash. Luke had crossed paths with men like him before, not brave enough to fight their own battles, but willing to pay others to spill blood. Nash would not let this raid end with a loss. He'd be back to finish what he started. Late in the afternoon, Harlan returned from scouting the Western Trail. He reported wagon tracks heading toward Nash's ranch and fresh horse prints alongside them. "Could be resupply," Harlan said. "Could be he's bringing in more men." Luke took that as confirmation. They had less time than he hoped. That evening, the camp gathered around the central fire. The elders spoke in their language, then turned to Luke. One of them asked him directly why he would risk staying here, why he cared about this fight. It was a question others had likely been wondering since his arrival. Luke didn't give them a long story. "Because I've been in places like this," he said, "and I've seen what happens when good men walk away. I'm not doing that again." The elders seemed to accept it. As the firelight flickered, Naina brought him a clay bowl of stew. She didn't leave right away, but sat beside him, knees bent, hands folded in her lap. For a while, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the camp filled the space. The crack of the fire, a child's soft laugh from one of the lodges, the murmur of voices. Finally, Naina glanced toward him. "If Nash comes, we will fight," she asked. Luke looked at her, steady. "We'll fight, and we'll make sure he doesn't come back." She studied his face for a moment, as if measuring whether he meant it. Then she nodded once and stayed there beside him until the fire burned low and the night settled quiet over the bluff. The next morning, the sky was a pale wash of blue, the air cool enough to make the breath visible for a short moment before the heat came. Luke was already up, checking the trench lines and the new sections of stone wall. He ran his hand along one part of the wall, shifting a loose rock into place. It would hold against a charge. It had to. Tom and Cole had not yet returned from the trading post. Luke didn't like that. The trip there and back was only a day if a man kept a steady pace. It left him thinking about what could slow them: a broken wagon wheel, a meeting with the wrong people, or worse, a run-in with Nash's men before they could get home. Still, there was nothing to do but keep building. The younger braves were learning quickly. Luke had them reinforcing the wall with more brush and dirt to catch bullets. He set up firing points that were staggered so defenders wouldn't block each other's line of sight. Women cut strips of cloth from old blankets to use as bandages. Water skins were filled and set in shaded places. He didn't tell them to be ready for a siege, but he planned for one all the same. By mid-morning, the sound of hooves came from the North Trail. Luke stepped up onto a flat rock, rifle resting across his forearm, until he saw two riders, Tom in front, Cole behind with a pack mule. They came in covered in dust, but both were upright and alert. Luke met them halfway, and Tom wasted no time. "We got the supplies, but Nash knows you're here." Cole untied the mule's packs while Tom went on. "Word in the post is he's been paying drifters in gold to ride with him." They say he's bragging that he'll take back every horse and burn this camp to the ground before the month's out. Luke didn't look surprised. How many men? Tom shrugged. Could be a dozen. Could be more if he empties his pockets. That confirmed what Luke already suspected. Nash wasn't going to send a small party this time. He'd come in with enough to try and scare them into leaving or dying where they stood. Luke called the elders together, explained what Tom had heard, and told them they still had a choice: leave now or stand and fight. The oldest among them didn't hesitate. Our dead are here. Our water is here. We stay. Naina stood behind them as they spoke. When the meeting broke, she came to Luke. He will come soon, she said. Then we'll be ready, Luke replied. That afternoon, they worked harder. Luke had the men place sharpened stakes in the ground behind the trenches. The women stacked stones inside baskets to throw down if riders breached the wall. Children were kept close to the bluff's back wall, out of sight. Everyone knew their role. As the sun dropped low, Luke walked the camp one last time. Naina was at the water pots, refilling them with a small group of women. She had tied her hair back and cleaned the dirt from her face. The torn strap of her dress still hung loose at her shoulder, the fringe moving in the breeze. When she saw him, she paused. You think we can win? She asked. Luke stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. We don't have to win big. We just have to hit them hard enough they don't want to come back. She studied him, her eyes searching for doubt. She didn't find any. Then I will fight too, she said. Luke didn't argue. He knew better than to tell her no. Instead, he handed her a short rifle from the wagon and showed her how to check the chamber, where to place her feet, how to steady her aim. She learned fast. By nightfall, the camp was quiet. The fire was kept low to hide their numbers. Luke sat near the wall, rifle across his knees, scanning the darkness. Somewhere out there, Nash was gathering his men. Luke could almost feel it, the weight of what was coming. But he also felt something else when he thought of Naina's steady gaze and the way the camp had started to move as one. They were no longer just waiting to be hit. They were ready. The next day broke still, the kind of stillness that made men listen harder than they meant to. Luke was up before first light, walking the lines, checking every stake and wall segment. The trenches were set, the sharpened stakes hidden behind them, water skins placed where fighters could reach them without leaving cover. He stopped at the east side and studied the horizon. The land rolled away in low ridges and pale dirt flats, nothing moving yet, but his gut told him it wouldn't stay that way. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the camp was awake. Women gathered the children close to the bluff, out of the line of fire. Older men checked weapons, while the younger braves stood at their posts with a mix of focus and restlessness. Luke noticed the way some of them shifted their feet too much, the way others gripped their rifles too tight. He'd seen it before. The weight of waiting could fray a man's edge before the fight even began. He moved along the line, speaking to each one in turn, his voice low and steady, giving short, practical reminders. Breathe. Keep your muzzle low until you're sure. Wait for the call. Tom approached from the north trail, his face set. I saw dust, maybe 6 miles out, he reported. Looked like riders, but too far to count. Luke nodded. Then they're coming. That was all he said, but the words carried through the camp. People straightened their backs. The pace of the work shifted, faster, sharper. Naina crossed the camp toward him. The rifle he'd given her slung across her shoulder. She had tied a strip of cloth around her hair to keep it out of her eyes. The torn strap of her dress was now knotted, but the bruise at her temple was still visible. How long? She asked. Couple of hours, maybe less, Luke answered. He studied her for a moment. You know your position? She nodded. By the low wall, near the center. Where you said. Luke didn't doubt she would hold her ground, but he also knew what a first fight could do to someone. Stay low. Don't waste your shots. And if I tell you to move, you move. She met his gaze without flinching. I will not run. The camp settled into silence again. Men checked their weapons one last time. Luke had Cole take the high notch overlooking the northern approach, giving him the best line of sight for the first warning shots. Tom stayed with Luke near the center. Harlan took the far west side. Around mid-morning, the first glint of sunlight off metal appeared on the horizon. Then the shapes of riders formed, 15 at least, spreading out in a loose line. Luke's jaw tightened. They were coming slow, deliberate, the way men rode when they wanted to be seen and feared. At the center of the line was Calder Nash, red sash tied at his throat, sitting high in the saddle. Luke stepped up to the wall where he could be seen. He rested his rifle across the top and waited. When Nash and his men closed a speaking distance, Nash called out, "You've got something of mine. Horses, women, goods. Hand them over, and maybe I'll let you walk away." Luke didn't move. "The horses are theirs. The women are theirs. Nothing here belongs to you." Nash's grin was thin. "You really think you can stop me?" "I don't think," Luke said. "I know." The pause after that was short. Nash lifted his hand, and the riders spread wider. One man fired a pistol into the air, the sound cracking through the stillness. Luke raised his voice just enough for his own line to hear. "Hold!" The riders came closer. When the first crossed the shallow trench, the horse's front legs buckled, sending it and its rider tumbling. That was the signal. Cole's rifle barked from the notch, dropping one man from the saddle. Luke fired next, hitting another who was trying to skirt the trench. The air filled with the sharp, flat crack of rifles, the shouts of men, the pounding of hooves. Nayina's rifle sounded from the low wall, steady, controlled. Luke glanced her way once and saw her reloading with quick, sure hands. The fight was quick but hard. 2 of Nash's men lay dead, 3 more wounded. The rest pulled back, wheeling their horses and riding out of range. Nash stayed long enough to look at Luke with a promise in his eyes before turning away. When the dust settled, Luke walked the line, checking every position. No one from the camp had been killed. A few had grazes from bullets, nothing more. He stopped at Nayina's spot. She was sitting back on her heels, rifle across her lap, breathing hard but steady. When he crouched beside her, she looked at him and said simply, "We did not run." Luke gave a short nod. "No, we didn't." But he knew Nash wasn't finished. By the time the last of Nash's riders disappeared beyond the ridgeline, the camp had gone still again. The gunpowder smell hung in the warm air, sharp and metallic. Luke stayed where he was until Cole came down from the high notch and confirmed the enemy was truly gone. Only then did he give the signal for the women and children to come out from the bluff shadow. The wounded were brought to the central fire. Most were lucky. Shallow cuts, grazed shoulders, a cracked rib from a fall behind the wall. Luke moved between them, checking each injury, offering water where it was needed. He had seen enough fights to know that tending to the hurt quickly wasn't just about healing. It steadied the camp's nerves. People needed to see that no one had been left behind. Tom crouched beside him, his voice low. "Nash didn't bring everything he had. You saw that, right?" Luke nodded. "He was testing us. Now he knows the layout, the wall, the trenches. Next time he'll come in harder and smarter." "What's our move?" Tom asked. Luke glanced toward the bluff, where the women were helping patch the wall. "We make it so whatever he brings next time still isn't enough." As the camp got back to work, Luke noticed Nayina. She was standing by the low wall where she had fought, her rifle still in her hands. Her hair had come loose from the strip of cloth she'd tied it with, and a thin streak of soot marked her cheek. She wasn't shaking. If anything, she looked sharper, more alert than before. He walked over. "You shoot steady," he said. "I hit the man on the bay horse," she replied without hesitation. "He will not ride fast again." Luke studied her a moment, weighing something in his mind. "Most people's hands shake after their first fight." "My hands shook when they took our people," she said flatly. "Not now." Her words settled into him. It was clear she wasn't fighting just because the camp was in danger. She was fighting because this was her line, and she decided it wouldn't move again. By late afternoon, they had repaired the worst of the wall. Cole and Harlan moved more brush into position and reset the stakes. Luke had the young braves practice reloading and firing from behind cover, forcing them to keep their heads low and conserve rounds. He saw on their faces a new kind of focus. The shock of their first fight was already turning into a harder edge. At the evening meal, the elders spoke briefly. They thanked Luke and his men for standing with them and confirmed what everyone already knew: Nash would return. No one spoke of leaving. The choice to stay was final now. When darkness came, Luke made his rounds again. The fires were kept low. The guards were doubled on each side. He found Niina sitting near the bluff's edge, her rifle laid across her lap. She was looking out toward the north, where the land dipped into shadow. "You should rest," he told her. "I will when he is gone for good," she answered. Then, after a pause, "You could leave, you know. No one would call you a coward. This is not your fight." Luke sat down beside her. "I've walked away from too many fights that should have been mine. I'm not making that mistake again." They sat in silence for a while. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote called. The sound echoed off the rock walls. Niina shifted, her knee brushing against his. "When this is over," she said quietly, "I want you to stay. Not for a promise I made before. For now." Luke didn't answer right away. He looked out into the darkness, the shape of the land lit faintly by the moon. Then he said, "Let's get through what's coming. After that, we'll decide what staying means." For the first time that day, she allowed herself the smallest smile. The next 2 days passed with no sign of Nash, but Luke knew better than to think the fight was over. The quiet felt too heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. He used the time to push the camp harder. Every trench was deepened, every firing position checked, every water pot kept full. Ammunition was counted twice a day. The younger braves drilled until they could reload without looking down at their hands. At first light on the third day, Cole came down from the high notch with his jaw tight. "Dust trail on the northern flats," he said. "Big one. Could be 20 riders, maybe more." Luke didn't waste time asking questions he already knew the answer to. He sent Tom to gather the elders and Harlan to check the stakes and brush piles. Cole stayed in the notch to keep eyes on the movement. Within minutes, the camp was in motion. Women carried children to the back of the bluff. The wounded from the first fight were moved to cover, and the fighters took their positions. Luke found Niina at the low wall, already loading her rifle. She wore the same deerskin dress. Its strap knotted from the tear, but she had tied a band of cloth around her arm where the recoil had bruised her in the last fight. Her hair was pulled back tight, and her expression left no doubt she was ready. "Same position?" she asked. "Same position," Luke confirmed. He hesitated, then added, "If they break the wall, you fall back to the bluff. No arguments." She gave him a sharp look. "If they break the wall, I will still be here." There was no time to argue. The riders were visible now, a long line of dust and glinting steel under the sun. Nash was again at the center, but this time his line was thicker, tighter. He meant to hit hard and keep hitting. The first shots came from Cole's notch, sharp and measured, forcing the lead riders to swerve. Luke waited until they were within range of the trenches before giving the order to fire. The wall lit with rifle cracks. Horses screamed as they stumbled into the hidden pits. Men shouted, trying to close the gap. Nash's men kept coming, using the fallen horses as cover. Luke shifted position to plug a gap where 2 braves had been forced back. He fired twice, hitting a man in the chest and sending another sprawling. Bullets struck the wall around him, splintering stone. From the corner of his eye, he saw Niina fire, reload, and fire again, each shot deliberate. A rider tried to flank the wall, but she caught him clean, the shot snapping him backward in the saddle before he slid into the dirt. The fight lasted longer this time, close to 20 minutes of hard shooting and shouted orders. Then, finally, the line began to falter. Nash pulled his men back, retreating under covering fire. Luke didn't lower his rifle until the dust trail was moving away for good. His ears rang from the gunfire, and the acrid burn of powder hung thick in his throat. When the shooting stopped, the camp took stock. 2 of their own had been killed, and 3 more were wounded, 1 badly. Luke knelt beside the worst of them, a young brave with a chest wound, and pressed a cloth to the bleeding. He kept pressure on it until the women could take over. Niina came to him afterward, her face streaked with sweat and soot. "We held," she said. "We held," Luke agreed. He looked toward the horizon where Nash had vanished. "But he'll think about whether it's worth coming back." "And if he does?" she asked. Luke's gaze went back to her. "If he does, we finish it." For a moment, they stood there in the heat, surrounded by the smell of dust and smoke, the sound of quiet voices tending to the wounded. Then Luke reached for her shoulder, a brief, grounding touch, before turning to walk the line again. He needed to see every position with his own eyes. Nash might be gone for now, but Luke had been in enough fights to know that a man like that didn't walk away without leaving some unfinished business behind. The morning after the second fight, the camp was quiet but uneasy. Luke could see it in the way people moved, slower, with more glances toward the horizon than usual. Even in victory, they knew Nash was the kind of man who didn't like to leave a fight unfinished. Luke had the same thought. He doubted Nash would walk away and call it a loss. If he was smart, he'd try something different, maybe at night, maybe by cutting off their water. Luke met with the elders as the sun cleared the ridge. He told them they had two choices: wait for Nash to make his next move, or take it from him. The elders didn't speak for long before agreeing. Ending it now was better than letting him choose the terms. Luke decided they would ride for Nash's ranch that same day, before he had time to gather more men. He selected his riders carefully: Tom, Cole, Harlan, and 3 of the younger braves who had proven themselves in the last fight. They carried extra ammunition, water, and enough food for a long day's work. Naina wanted to go, but Luke shook his head. If something goes wrong, someone has to lead here, he told her. She didn't like it, but she understood. By mid-morning, they were in the saddle, heading north. The trail to Nash's place was wide and dusty, cutting through open flats and low ridges. Luke kept them moving at a steady pace, avoiding talk. He was thinking about every possible way the fight could go wrong. They reached the outer edge of Nash's land just after midday. A few riders patrolled the fence lines, but nothing heavy. Luke led them in low through a dry wash, circling to the rear of the ranch house where a small corral held most of Nash's stock. They came in fast, a sharp whistle, the thud of boots hitting dirt, and then it was over in seconds. The guards went down without a shot fired. One was smart enough to drop his rifle and run. Luke and Tom kicked in the back door of the ranch house. Inside, Nash was at a table, halfway through a bottle, his red sash tossed over the chair. He froze when he saw Luke, then went for the revolver at his hip. Luke was faster. One shot punched into the wall beside Nash's head, close enough to splinter wood. "You're finished," Luke said. His voice was low, flat. "You come near that camp again, you don't walk away." Nash's face twitched, but he saw the truth in Luke's eyes. "You think you can tell me what land I can take?" "I'm not telling you," Luke said. "I'm making sure you understand." He nodded to Tom, who stepped forward and took Nash's pistol. Cole brought in one of the braves to stand watch while the others rounded up the remaining men and sent them down the road on foot. They left Nash alive but stripped of every horse in the corral and every rifle in the house. Luke knew that without men or mounts, Nash's power in the territory was gone. The message was clear, and men like Nash didn't need more than one. By the time they rode back into the bluff, the sun was dipping low. The camp gathered as the riders came in, the sight of the extra horses drawing murmurs. Luke dismounted and went straight to Naina. She stepped forward, eyes scanning him quickly for wounds. When she found none, she let out a breath she'd been holding. "It's over," Luke told her. "He won't come back." The relief in the camp was immediate, shoulders unknotted, voices lifted. The elders thanked Luke and his men openly, something they rarely did in front of others. That night, a fire was built bigger than any they had dared since the first raid. Food was shared, songs were sung, and for the first time in weeks, people laughed without looking over their shoulders. Later, when most had gone to their lodges, Luke and Naina stayed by the fire. She leaned in close, her hand resting on his. "You said you'd decide what staying means after it was done," she said quietly. Luke turned to her. "It means I'm not going anywhere." Her hand tightened over his. She smiled then, not the small guarded smile she had given him before, but one that was warm and sure. "Then you stay," she said. In the days that followed, the camp returned to its rhythm. The wall stayed up, the trenches stayed dug, but the air was lighter. Luke helped rebuild the burned lodges and put a roof on the one he and Naina would share. In time, people stopped calling him the white man who helped and started calling him by his name. By early autumn, the camp was stronger than it had been before the raids. And in the quiet evenings, when the work was done, Luke and Niina would sit on the bluff, looking out over the land they had fought to hold, knowing they had kept it, and each other for good.